The call came in at 6:47 in the morning. A junior auditor at Korea Investment Trust Management had been working through the night. She had found something, a number that did not exist. A fund backed by assets that, when she traced them to their source, led nowhere. She called her supervisor. Her supervisor called his. By noon, nobody was picking up. By the end of the week, $4.1 billion in investor money had simply ceased to exist. His name was Park Hyun-jae, and in the late 1990s, there was no one in South Korean finance more admired. He had graduated top of his class from Seoul National University in 1971. He wore the same dark charcoal suits every week, pressed to a crease that could cut paper. He spoke rarely and precisely. People said he did not waste words because he did not need to. His track record spoke instead. Through the brutal volatility of Asian markets in the late 1980s, the funds he managed held. They grew. Investors came to him not because he promised them the world, but because he seemed to promise nothing, and delivered anyway. That restraint, that almost monastic calm, made him untouchable. Regulators liked him, politicians liked him. The Korea Security Supervisory Board cited him twice for exemplary conduct. Korea Investment Trust Management, KITM, was not a small operation. By 1997, it was managing the retirement savings of over 2 million South Korean households. Teachers, factory workers, widows who had handed their husbands' life insurance payouts to a fund they believed was watched over by serious men. And for a while, it was. But 1997 was not a normal year. On July 2nd, 1997, Thailand unpegged the baht. What followed was not a correction. It was a detonation. The Asian financial crisis tore through currency markets, banking systems, and investment funds like a fire through dry paper. South Korea was not spared. The Korean won collapsed. The Kospi lost more than half its value. The International Monetary Fund flew in with a $58 billion emergency bailout, the largest in history at that time. Companies that had existed for 40 years were gone in 90 days. Park Hyun-jae watched it happen from his corner office on the 14th floor of the KTM building on Yeouido-dong, the financial district that locals called Korea's Wall Street. And he made a decision. Rather than report the losses, which by October 1997 had already reached $800 million, he hid them. He did not hide them clumsily. He hid them with the precision of a man who had spent 30 years learning exactly where regulators looked and, more importantly, where they did not. He created a series of subsidiary accounts, paper vehicles registered in names that traced back to shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg. He moved losing positions into these structures. On the books that regulators saw, KITM's funds remained healthy, growing even. To keep the illusion alive, Park did what every man in his position eventually does. He used new investor money to pay old investor redemptions. He told nobody. Not his compliance team, not his board, not the auditors who came every quarter and left satisfied. Between October 1997 and March 1999, 17 months, he buried $4.1 billion in losses inside a structure so complex that even after it collapsed, forensic accountants would spend 3 years untangling it. The investors kept coming. That was the cruelest part, because the market was terrifying everywhere else and KTM looked stable. Money flooded in during the crisis, ordinary Koreans liquidating other assets and parking their savings somewhere that looked safe. They were not parking their money somewhere safe. They were feeding the machine that would eventually consume them. The first sign that something was wrong came not from a regulator. It came from a woman named Choi Soo-yeon. She was a mid-level fund administrator, 34 years old, who had been tasked with reconciling quarterly statements in February 1999. She noticed a discrepancy. Not billions, just a number slightly off, a rounding error that didn't round right. She flagged it internally. She was reassigned to a different department within a week, but she kept her notes. Choi eventually contacted the Financial Supervisory Service anonymously in late March 1999. The FSS launched a quiet review. What they found cracked the case open like a fault line. Within the subsidiary accounts, examiners discovered bond positions recorded at face value that had been in default for over a year. Assets listed as liquid that had not traded since before the crisis. And a web of transactions between Kitem and 3 affiliated companies that had no economic purpose whatsoever. They existed only to absorb losses and make them disappear. On April 14, 1999, FSS examiners arrived at the Kitem building on Yaoido-dong at 8 in the morning. They brought 12 investigators and a court order. Park Hyun-jae was not there. His office was clean. His charcoal jacket was folded over the back of his chair. His reading glasses were on his desk. His coffee cup was cold. He had left sometime the night before and had not returned. He was found 4 days later, not fled, not hiding in a foreign country with stolen millions. He was found in a hotel room in Incheon, 12 kilometers from the airport he had apparently never reached. He had taken his own life. He left no note, no confession, no explanation. Just the arithmetic of what he had done, waiting on the FSS servers for investigators to read. The fallout was immediate and savage. 2 million investor accounts were frozen. The Korean government was forced to inject $13.3 billion in public funds to stabilize the broader investment trust sector, money that came from taxpayers, many of whom were also Kitem victims. 19 senior Kitem executives were indicted. 11 were convicted. The longest sentence handed down was 7 years. Most served less. Choi Soo-yeon, the woman who first found the discrepancy, received a formal commendation from the FSS. She also received death threats. She moved cities twice in 2000. In a 2003 interview she gave to a Korean financial journal, she said the hardest part was not the threats. It was watching the men who signed off on false reports for 17 months receive sentences shorter than the time it took her to recover professionally from reporting them. The victims who lost retirement savings had limited legal recourse. Class action mechanisms in Korea at the time were weak. Many settled for partial government compensation worth fractions of what they had invested. A group of elderly investors staged a protest outside the FSS building in Seoul in August 1999. They held signs. They were photographed. Nothing changed. The Kitem scandal directly accelerated regulatory reforms that restructured how Korean investment funds were supervised. The reforms were necessary. They were also 17 months too late for 2 million people who had trusted a man because he wore the same suits every week and never made promises he couldn't keep, except the one that mattered. What stays with you when you trace this story to its end is not the number. $4.1 billion is abstract. What is not abstract is the junior auditor sitting alone at 3 in the morning, finding a number that didn't exist, and understanding, before she could articulate it, that something enormous and terrible had already happened. She was not the last line of defense. She was the only line. And the man who built the machine that nearly swallowed her had already folded his jacket over the back of his chair and walked out into the night.